Hello and welcome to Brewers Daily, part of the Fan Arch Podcast Network. This episode is brought to you by Kalshi. Use promo code FANARCHBASEBALL to get $10 when you trade 10. I'm Dave Gasper here. We have made it to a Friday show here at the end of the week. Brewers and Cubs coming up this weekend, starting tonight. We'll talk about that matchup coming up here this weekend. Also, we'll take a look at what's going on in Major League Baseball in terms of the collective bargaining agreements and proposals and shots going back and forth. Also, All-Star Game finalists have been announced, but we got to start with the transaction here that the Brewers made. Craig Yoho has been optioned back down to AAA Nashville, and this is not really a surprise. As we saw with the finale there against Cincinnati, Yoho had a little bit of trouble, gave up a couple of runs, and you know, it's tough with Yoho because it seems like the stuff is there. I mean, there is just dominance in AAA. He is too good for AAA essentially, but he hasn't really kind of quite found his footing in the Brewers' big league bullpen. I mean, he's way too good for Nashville, but he hasn't really hit the ground running. Hasn't really clicked in the major leagues. So it's kind of tough for where the Brewers can put him and try and give him some run because this is a very tough bullpen for the Brewers. You've got to earn your keep if you're going to be able to stick around, if you're one of those guys on the outside looking in. So when you have outings like that, and then also you have an injured player coming back, it kind of puts you on the outside looking in because it appears like Jared Koenig is going to be activated off the IL and finally return to this Brewers bullpen after missing most of the season so far with that UCL sprain. And he's been rehabbing, trying to get back. The Brewers did not make that official quite yet. They just announced over the off day that Yoho had been optioned. A corresponding move had not officially been made, but in all likelihood, it is going to be Jared Koenig that ends up getting activated here off the IL. He's been rehabbing AAA Nashville for quite a while, and it's like, okay, you're trying to see the velo get back up, and the velo wasn't quite where it usually is for Jared Koenig. Some of that may just be the fact that he's on a rehab assignment, and there's not the same juice for those as there is in the major league. So maybe just getting him back up into Milwaukee will help that velo finally come all the way back for him. But that's what it looks like the plan is going to be here. Craig Yoho being sent down, likely going to be Jared Koenig coming back off the IL, which gives the Brewers another trusted lefty reliever out there. They've been operating largely just with Aaron Ashby in there since Brandon Woodruff came back off the IL and Drew Rom got sent back down. So Robert Gasser has kind of been, there and available as that extra lefty in that bullpen. You also got Shane Drowan, who made the starts for that finale against Cincinnati. He's a possibility. He's been in that bullpen role. So you got those guys. You got Drowan and Gasser, who are two starters by trade. That maybe they'll stick, in the rotation. One of them likely will. I'm not sure if it's going to end up being both. But you're going to see one of them stick in there, and the other one could be available out of the bullpen. But now you're going to have another lefty back there with Jared Koenig. And the Brewers have liked operating with multiple lefties out of their bullpen, but all of their bullpen arms that are hurt are all of their lefties. It's been Koenig, it's DL Hall, it's Rob Z, it's Angel Zerpa, it's Brian Fitzpatrick. 5 relievers on the IL. All 5 are left-handed. It has just decimated that left-handed depth that the Brewers have, so they're going to be very excited to get some more back there with Jared Koenig. And I know Koenig kind of struggled before the injury. I think part of that could very much be attributed to the fact that he was dealing with an injury. He was dealing with his elbow not being 100%. So I think Koenig, especially with the success that he's had over the past couple of years in the Brewers bullpen, I think he's earned a little bit of the benefit of the doubt that he's going to be able to figure things back out and still be an effective relief option for the crew here going forward. So that injury, I think, played a factor. So we'll see if the velocity comes back to where it needs to be for him to be successful. And if it does, then that's a very positive sign here for the Brewers, getting one of their big lefties back in that group. So Koenig coming back, great news. Craig Yoho, sad news for him. He ends up going back down to AAA Nashville. All right. The All-Star starter, the phase one of the All-Star voting has concluded, and the Brewers do not have any finalists in there for the National League. Bryce Terang was the closest, but just missed out there at second base. Bryson Stott and Ozzie Albies are the top two at that position, so they're going to be battling to be a starter. Just not enough votes for Bryce Terang, and it's unfortunate because Bryce Terang is arguably the top second baseman in the National League. May not have the name power quite yet, but I think he's certainly getting there. And I think he'll still end up being an all-star from this group. He'll end up having to be one of the reserves that end up making the roster and just won't be named the starter. But give it time. I mean, the way that he is progressing here, the way that Terang is improving here in his career, it's really probably only a matter of time until Terang becomes an all-star starter. So he'll get there one day, and I think he's going to make the all-star game in general this year. But he's going to have to make it as a reserve. When you're looking at either the manager or the league, picking some options to make the roster and fill it out. Terang is a strong contender, but also William Contreras came up short over there at catcher. Jake Bauers, unsurprisingly, came up short at first base. There's just too much name power, name recognition ahead of him. Even though he may be having a super strong season and maybe a better season than compared to some of those guys, but when you don't have the name brand of a Freddie Freeman or a Matt Olson or a Bryce Harper, it's going to be very difficult for you to surpass them in fan balloting for the All-Star voting. So Terang misses the cut. Bauers, Contreras missed the cut, but that also doesn't mean that none of these guys are going to end up being all-stars. They certainly could be, but it's just going to have to be as a reserve and getting into the game a little bit later on. So that's something to keep an eye on as well here. All right. We're looking at every single game on Kalshi, as we do all the time here on Brewers Daily. And look, we got Brewers Cubs coming up here, and obviously the trend line is looking pretty good for the Brewers in terms of how everyone on Kalshi is going. 69% chance for the Brewers to win, and we talked about that a little bit yesterday. Those are where the odds are. It's high up there because it's Jacob Misiorowski bump day, and we love Jacob Misiorowski bump day, and it takes me to look at the player props, and Jacob Misiorowski 10 plus strikeouts currently trading at 33% chance to happen. And when Jacob Misiorowski's on the mound, I personally think you have a better than 1 in 3 chance to see 10 plus strikeouts. It might be closer to a 50-50 shot that it's a 10 plus strikeout game for Miz, the way that he's been pitching. But I look at it, I see this as a very good value in that sense. So with a 33% chance for Jacob Misiorowski to get 10 strikeouts of the Cubs. He talks about the big, wanting to beat the big market teams. He's always on his best when he's facing the big market teams. You don't think he wants to take down big market Chicago, especially when they're in the division. You don't think he's going to be amped up for that? 10 plus strikeouts for Jacob Misiorowski at 33% chance. That means a $100 trade pays out $300 with a win. That is absolutely what I'm going to be looking at here for Jacob Misiorowski and the crew. This is something I'm feeling very good about, because on Kalshi you're trading against peers in a live market, meaning there's no house. And as the probability changes, you can buy in and out of your position for a limited time. Download the Kalshi app and use this promo code FANARCHBASEBALL to get $10 when you trade 10 KALSHI Kalshi trade on anything. All right, so with it kind of being a bit of a slower news day on Thursday because the Brewers were not playing. They had an off day, their last off day until the All-Star break, actually. But that doesn't mean it was slow in all of baseball, because Major League Baseball and the Players Association are continuing to talk about the upcoming CBA and what things could be looking like for baseball in the future. Now, I do think it's a good sign that we're seeing some proposals come back and forth here pretty quickly. However, the proposals are, increasingly adding new things here, and things that are going to take a long time to get figured out, because MLB is pushing for the cap and floor system, and they really doubled down and put in some more specifics on that on Thursday, including putting in restrictions on the length of contracts, capping them at 5 years for free agents. They're also allowing 6 years for retaining homegrown guys. So if you want to stay home with where you've been as a free agent, you can sign for 6 years. But if you're leaving, like let's say, for example, William Contreras leaves in free agency, or William Contreras hits free agency, the Brewers can sign him to a 6-year deal if they wanted to, but any other team could only sign him to a 5-year deal. So it's going to be kind of similar to the NBA, where you have max contracts. Like you can only offer this many years and this many dollars. That is a maximum you can offer to a player. That is what they're essentially putting in. They got this cornerstone player provision, similar to the NBA's Bird rights, the Larry Bird rights, to try and retain your star players. But MLB has accepted a couple of early Players Association proposals, which I feel like is rare and notable that MLB has done this. They agreed to the proposal to allow players who are 30 years old to qualify for free agency with 5 years of service time rather than 6. So they agreed to a stipulation that can decrease contractual control for players. I feel like that's pretty notable, because MLB has been steadfast against that for a long time. They also accepted the Players Association's proposal to eliminate the qualifying offer system. Now, previously, they were trying to bargain that to pair with an international draft. Now they've just accepted it outright here early on in June. So I think those are two very notable things. But also, Major League Baseball, I feel like, knows that in order to get all the changes that they want to make with the cap and floor and all the other salary restrictions, length of contracts, things like that, they know that they're going to have to offer a lot of concessions in other areas. So I think they're trying to banter in some good faith there. But it's like, okay, we will accept some of these things early on. We know we're going to kind of come to that, so let's just do that now, because we're putting all these other things in there that it's going to be so hard for the Players Association to stomach. And that's something that I think is going to be a big part of these negotiations. MLB also proposed an increase to the minimum salary to $1 million. So it's been at $780,000 this year. The players proposed $1.5 million, and now MLB is already coming up to $1 million. So that's a pretty significant increase, that they have already jumped up that much towards the Players Association's proposal. They also proposed eliminating deferred compensation. Thank goodness for that. I would love to see that put in place, because that's what the Dodgers have used and abused to become what they are. And I think at a bare minimum, we're going to get some sort of limit and restriction on deferred compensation, just because that has been what's been exploited so much. So when it comes down to the end of these negotiations, I think some sort of restriction there on deferred compensation is going to be a big part of it. But the limiting the maximum contract length and salary, I think, is going to be tough to stomach for the Players Association, especially when you're already putting in a salary cap. I think for me personally, I would not want it like the NBA, where they have the cap system and they have max contracts and things like that. I'd kind of rather have it like the NFL, where it's like you have your cap, but you can sign any player to whatever amount, and you just got to figure it out a little bit. Like you got to figure out how much you can spend or want to spend on a guy. If you want to spend $40 million per season on a player, or $50 million per season on a player, great. But you're going to have to deal with trying to figure out how to make the rest of your roster work with that. Okay, like there's no cap on how much you can pay a quarterback in the NFL. But if you want to pay a guy $55 million, you got to understand, like, okay, it's going to be tougher to put a little bit of the rest of this roster together, because you've got that quarterback making that much money. So I think that's what I would rather see. But clearly, MLB is kind of going for a similar to NBA style salary cap. So We'll see what ultimately this ends up looking like in the end, if it ends up coming to fruition. But MLB put out like a tweet on this with like a whole explanation, a whole graphic, which I feel like is unusual for them, putting that out for a CBA proposal. But it also screams that they are trying to win the narrative there by putting that out, and trying to get ahead of the narrative and put out their own story on what it is and win over the fan sentiment. So I think that's what they're aiming for there, and it honestly I think could be very successful, a very successful strategy for them to do that. But we're seeing more bantering back and forth. We're seeing it early on, and we're seeing accepting of some proposals early on here as well. I think that's a good sign, but at the same time, these are going to be, there's going to be some very tough sticking points to keep an eye on here. So that's kind of some of the news that came out on Thursday. And now just kind of looking, going back to the Brewers here on the field. Actually, no, strike that. Before I get to that, that limit on contracts, topping out at 5 years, 6 years, whatever, perhaps that's a reason why the Brewers have signed Cooper Pratt and Luis Lara and these guys to these 7-8 year deals early on, because they figure something like that is probably coming. If they get to a cap and floor system, there's going to be a limit on contract lengths. So if you get them in now, you don't have to worry about that. So I think that could be why we're seeing the Brewers and all these other teams sign players to these long-term contract extensions very early on, because they want to get that in before this kind of system gets put in place. So that could be what spurred on these Cooper Pratt and Luis Lara contract extensions. So almost forgot that. That was kind of a key piece. But anyways, okay, moving on. The Chicago Cubs series this weekend. Big series. The Brewers have a chance to bury the Cubs here. The Cubs, after winning against the Mets, they sit 6.5 games back of the Brewers in the division. So the best the Cubs can hope for is being 3.5 games back. The best the Brewers can hope for is burying the Cubs 9.5 games back at the end of this weekend. So this series, for the two of them, I mean, Friday night here, you got Jacob Mizorowski on the bump for the Crew. Miz Bump Day, always the best. And he's going up against Brewers legend, Colin Ray. Colin Ray getting the start here. He's been with the Cubs a little bit, followed Counsell, but Colin Ray has an ERA of around 5. He's 5-5, 4.99 ERA. And Miz has been, well, Jacob Mizorowski. He has just been absolutely dominant. So that's your pitching matchup here on Friday night. I feel pretty good about Miz's chances to outduel Colin Ray. And then on Saturday, it's Kyle Harrison on the bump for the Crew. He's also been really good for the Brewers, and him and Miz back to back, I think, is a really strong duo. And then Brandon Woodruff getting the start on Sunday for the Crew. So you've got your top 3 arms going for this series. And on Saturday and Sunday for the Cubs is good old reliable TBD. So that's going to be a lot of innings for TBD there. So don't know who is going to be starting those games. That's going to be figured out here at some point soon. The Cubs did just acquire David Peterson from the Mets. There's some projection that he could be pitching in this series. I also see on Fangraphs here that should everything kind of line up as it has been, Vince Velasquez would be pitching on Sunday. But again, presently TBD. The only matchup that we know for sure is Mizorowski versus Colin Ray here tonight, and that's going to be a good one, I think, especially for the Brewers. But it's going to be a very big series. The Brewers can either kill the momentum that the Cubs have coming off a sweep of the Mets, or they can allow the Cubs to get some real momentum and make this more of a division race as the calendar is about to flip to July. So you can bury the Cubs, or you can let them back at you. And if I'm the Brewers, I'd rather just bury the Cubs and put it as much out of place as you possibly can right now. But that's going to make it a fun weekend. And we'll be breaking it down on Monday, whatever happens here on Brewers Daily. So be sure to subscribe. Follow me on Twitter at dgasper24. Appreciate all of you watching and listening. And we'll see you again next time for another episode of Brewers Daily.